and then we'll get started. So thanks for joining us. All right. Hi, everyone who's joined us. Just giving folks a few minutes to join. I think we'll start at like 2:03. All right, so for those of you who just joined, we're about to get started in a moment here, but just want to give folks a minute to join, get started. Well, it's 2:03 now. Why don't we get started now? Great, so welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Today, we are really excited to be able to present the draft guidelines for round 2 of the Regional Climate Collaboratives program. My name is Ina Lupin. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the program manager for the Community Assistance for Climate Equity program at SGC, which administers the Regional Climate Collaboratives program. And I'm here with 2 of my colleagues who will be leading this workshop with me. So Sarah and Blanca, could you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi everyone. Sarah Risher. I use she, her pronouns. I am a program analyst on the team. Yeah, and I'll pass it to Blanca.
Hi everyone, my name is Blanca Escobedo. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm also a program analyst on the case team. And I'll pass the mic back to Ina.
Great, thank you both. All right, great. So we'd also love for all of you who have joined us today to introduce yourself via the chat. You can share your name, organization, and the region that you work in if you'd like. We ask that everyone stay on mute for the duration of the presentation today. You can post any questions that you have in the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer as many of your questions as we can during the Q&A portion of the webinar at the end. If you would prefer to ask a question verbally, you can just raise your hand during the Q&A session and we'll call on you to come off mute and ask your question. And for anything that we don't get a chance to get to today, if we run out of time, we will be following up with a Q&A document that will respond to all of the questions, even if we run out of time. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to be walking through a quick high-level summary of the Regional Climate Collaboratives program and the timeline for round 2. Then we'll dive in a little bit more depth into the draft guidelines. And then we'll be open for questions and answers. The next slide, please. Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with the Regional Climate Collaboratives program, it was established through legislation in 2018 through Senate Bill 1072. And the program is designed to help communities establish partnerships, funding pathways, plan and policy readiness, and a local network of technical assistance providers to pursue funding and implement climate projects. RCC funds collaboratives of cross-sectoral and community-rooted partners working together through a collaborative governance model that we call a collaborative stakeholder structure. And we'll discuss that a little bit more in a moment. The program seeks to advance both place-based and region-wide climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency efforts. And it aims to fund both emerging and established collaboratives across the state. Next slide, please. So we often get asked what we mean by capacity building. It's really central to the Regional Climate Collaboratives program. And so for this program, we define it as the process of strengthening local coordination, leadership, knowledge, skills, expertise, and access to resources in under-resourced communities, with the goal of helping to develop or increase the ability of that community to independently compete for grants and implement projects in the future. Next slide, please. And so these are our program objectives. These are really core to the program, and all of the work that collaboratives are doing, we really want to see tied back to these 4 program objectives. So developing actionable plans and projects, building social infrastructure, centering community engagement and decision-making, and developing equity-centered processes. Next slide, please. Thanks. So as a new addition to round 2, we're proposing the addition of 2 funding tracks for small and large RCC grants. We're hoping that this will allow applicants with similar award amounts to compete within the same pool, and also ensure a little bit more diversity in the scale and scope of the collaboratives that we fund. And during the selection process, we're planning to recommend, or we're proposing to recommend the 2 top awards from each one of these funding tracks. And then with the leftover funds, using that to focus on the highest scoring applications located in counties that have not yet received a Regional Climate Collaborative Award in either round 1 or 2, regardless of award size. And this is an effort to really ensure that we are meeting our geographic diversity targets for the program as well. This is highlighted in a little bit more detail in the program guidelines, and happy to respond to any questions that folks have at the end. I think we can go to the next slide. And so this is our timeline for the program. So we released the public draft on March 15th, last Wednesday, which opened a 30-day public comment period that will close April 15th. We'll be holding specific workshops in early April to receive feedback and answer questions. And then after incorporating all of the public feedback that we receive, we'll be presenting the proposed final guidelines to the council at the end of June. We'll be releasing our notice of funding availability and application materials on July 6th, and then offering application workshops in mid-July. We haven't yet set those dates, but we'll certainly let you all know as soon as we do. And then pre-proposals will be due September 6th, full proposals due December 6th, and then finalist interviews in mid-January of 2024. And we'll be making awards in February of 2024. Next slide. And so this is a little bit more information about the guidelines workshops that I mentioned. These are the dates here. We really encourage you all to attend those workshops and then share them within your networks. Our presentation today is more focused on kind of providing an overview of the draft guidelines and getting, kind of hearing and responding to the questions that you all have. But we are, of course, open to receiving any initial feedback that you would like to share to the extent that time allows today. But these will be really a little bit more of a deep dive and opportunity to provide some tailored feedback with breakout sessions to be able to kind of have more of a conversation and workshop the guidelines. And so with that, I will turn it now over to Sarah Risher on our team for a deeper dive into the round 2 draft guidelines.
Great. Thank you, Ina, and hi again, everyone. So we'll start our guidelines overview by walking through the table of contents on the next slide. So the round 2 guidelines are organized into these 5 key sections you see on your screen. So about the RCC program is quick, helpful framing, like Ina just provided. The second section is before applying. This is really the nuts and bolts of the program, all you need to know about eligibility requirements. The third section is preparing and submitting an application. The fourth is what you need to know after applying, and the fifth is what awarded applicants can expect. In today's conversation, we're going to focus in on sections 2 and 3, and we're going to discuss the contents in the order that they're in the guidelines for anyone who has those open. And then one quick note, we did prepare a summary of proposed changes, which we'll also include in the chat. And so that's like a high-level overview of the differences between round 1 and round 2. So now we can dive right into the next slide. We'll start with eligible applicants. And so this program is open to a broad range of applicant types, and they are categorized in these 5 buckets. And so California Native American tribes are eligible applicants, as well as community-based organizations and nonprofits, local government agencies, small businesses. And then this 5th category is other organizations with a history of providing community-based outreach and technical assistance. And so this one is kind of broad, it's our catch-all. It's really up to applicants to determine who in their region and in their local communities is playing this role, and they'll provide a justification for the for those organizations that don't maybe fit into the first 4 applicant types in the application. And a minimum of 4 applicants of any type from this list must come together to apply for this opportunity. Next slide. So together, the applicants will form a collaborative stakeholder structure, which is a model for shared governance and guides the collaborative's organization, decision-making processes, financial relationships, and the execution of the shared scope of work. Within the collaborative stakeholder structure, there are 2 required roles: managing stakeholder and partners. So one organization within the collaborative stakeholder structure will serve as the managing stakeholder, and this is who will be responsible for administering the RCC grant if awarded. And this organization needs to demonstrate that they have the administrative and financial capacity to play that role for the collaborative. And then partners are those members of are funded members of the collaborative stakeholder structure who are not playing in that role of managing stakeholder. The partners are responsible for implementing specific capacity building activities outlined within the collaborative's application. Partners should bring different expertise and skills to deliver on their components of the collaborative's work plan. Something new for round 2 is that we are proposing to allow applicants to include this 3rd and optional role of supporters. Supporters are those entities that the collaborative will work with to leverage community engagement, policymaking, and technical assistance opportunities. They would not be funded by the RCC grant and instead plan to offer in-kind time and resources to help advance the work of the collaborative. And so applicants can choose to include supporters within their collaborative stakeholder structure, but it's not mandatory to do so. The last thing to flag here is that applicants must develop a partnership agreement. And this is what describes the governance, organization, and financial relationships of the collaborative stakeholder structure. Due to round 1 applicant feedback, we're proposing that we no longer ask applicants to submit a signed partnership agreement, and instead just submit an unsigned draft of the partnership agreement, and then a signed version would be provided if awarded. Next slide. So this slide is to provide a visual of what the collaborative stakeholder structure kind of looks like, the relationship. And so the managing stakeholder will enter into the grant agreement with SGC, and then the partnership is governed by that partnership agreement. The collaborative stakeholder structure is really a foundational aspect of the program because we're really seeking to invest in diverse and cross-sectoral partnerships that can facilitate census-oriented decision-making and collective power sharing and advance holistic climate adaptation and mitigation work. Next slide. So the RCC program includes a set of mandatory activities that are categorized into 4 key types. So the first 4 here that you see on your screen, these are our required or mandatory activity types, and I'll dive a little bit more into these. The mandatory activities are intentionally quite broad, and this allows applicants to really explain to us what they look like in their own regional and community context. And then the last two categories here are optional activities that collaboratives may choose to do if they would like. So next slide. So relationship building, priority identification, plan, and project development is really a key priority of the program, as indicated by our program objectives. And the slide, or the activities you see here on this slide, are the mandatory activities that fall within that category. So really wanting to see our RCCs conducting community engagement, convening stakeholders, developing and aligning community and regional plans, things like that. Next slide. And then this next bucket of mandatory activities is to really serve as a local technical assistance provider or hub. We really hope that our RCCs can serve in this role for their communities and region. And so these are the required activities really associated with playing that technical assistance provider role. So providing technical advice to develop and align multi-benefit climate projects with funding sources, coordinating and implementing grant development trainings, project management, grant monitoring, things of that nature. Next slide. And so this slide shows our last two required activities: conducting RCC project evaluation, and then engaging in peer-to-peer learning. So SGC will facilitate peer-to-peer learning for that cross learning of all of our awarded collaboratives. And next slide. And finally, our optional activities of data collection and analysis and education and training. These are, again, optional, but came up as a need in our first round of listening when we were developing the program. And more about each of these are on page 10 of our guidelines. Next slide. So there are 4 required project deliverables for this grant. The first is an RCC action plan, and this really builds upon that partnership agreement that applicants submit, and this allows them to add more detail to the key activities, the roles and responsibilities, and really pencil in more of that, build out their timeline for their shared work. And this is developed within the first start of the grant term. The second project deliverable is a capacity building toolkit, and this compiles the capacity building materials and other outputs created during the grant term. And the goal is for this to serve as a resource for the partners within the region beyond the grant term. And so we're hoping this can be a living resource that collaboratives continue to build upon. Of course, starting it during the RCC grant term, but deliverable is a community solutions inventory. And so this kind of just pulls together all of the priority plans and projects that collaborative developed or implemented throughout the RCC grant term. And this can be used kind of as a communication tool to highlight the work that you've done, but also as a mechanism for collaboratives to voice and advance their priorities locally and regionally to various funders. And then lastly, annual reports. The legislation that established the RCC program requires that our collaboratives develop annual reports to share the work that they've been doing during the grant term. Next slide. So now I'll quickly share about our eligible costs. So we have a few eligible cost categories: staff, consultants, travel, tools, subscriptions, and software, and then engagement, outreach, education, and training. A few highlights. The indirect cost rate may be 30% or less. RCC funds can be used for food, childcare, and participation compensation if it is tied to a direct work product. All applicants are required to hold 3 to 5% of the direct costs of the budget for evaluation activities. So engaging in the evaluation, developing an evaluation plan, and then also required to hold 3 to 5% of their direct cost for participating in the peer-to-peer learning that SGC will facilitate. And then this is new from between round 1 and to now, 10% of the total of the direct cost budgets can be used for consultants. Next slide. And then just a few quick flags on our ineligible costs. We cannot fund costs that occur outside of the grant agreement term. We also cannot fund anything related to construction, direct or indirect. We also cannot fund advocacy work, such as lobbying for the passage of bills or propositions. And we also, on the right here, we do have some stipulations around funds that are used for community engagement and outreach, and just making sure that no RCC funding is used for alcohol or participation incentives or meetings that do not advance the RCC work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blanca to share a little bit more about our eligible project region and then go into our scoring criteria.
Thank you, Sarah. For eligible project region for this second round, we're going to maintain both a regional and place-based component to the project area eligibility with slight modifications to each. So for the region, the change to the definition of the region is to increase the flexibility for applicants to define their own region. So instead of using a county scale, now applicants can determine your own region on shared natural, political, and built environmental systems, climate risks, and other shared challenges or dynamics. And similar to the last round, however an applicant determines their own regional boundary, the region must be contiguous and should not exceed 8 counties. Next slide, please. For the communities of focus, the census tracts representing the communities and neighborhoods where the collaborative would conduct its place-based work. A community of focus should be a single census tract or a cluster of census tracts, and collaboratives must serve a minimum of 2 communities of focus with at least 75% of the census tracts identified within those communities must meet SB 1072's definition. And we are proposing to increase the percentage of those under-resourced communities served by the collaboratives from 51% in the first round to now 75% in round 2. Next slide. So it's really important to the purpose of the program to connect the regional and place-based components because the program is intended to enable meaningful capacity building activities in order to advance climate action in under-resourced communities in the state. So the proposals for this program should propose to do place-based capacity building work within those communities of focus and identify and pursue climate projects to implement in those census tracts. And the regional aspect of the RCC program will aim these collaboratives to leverage, complement, and build on existing regional efforts. And this will allow the collaborative an avenue for the communities of focus to engage in region-wide coordination, policymaking, and share expertise from those place-based projects. Next slide, please. So the application for the program will, similarly to round 1, will be a 2-phased application proposal. However, unlike the first round of RCC, a pre-proposal will be required in order to submit a full proposal. However, we will not review to give a score on the pre-proposal, but to instead determine eligibility and help applicants determine and think through a full proposal and also receive feedback on those proposal concepts. We will release a notice of funding availability later this spring, early summer, and applicants can access the pre-proposal materials then. And the pre-proposal will be due September 6th. For the full proposal, it will build off the pre-proposal with more detail on partners, activities, budget, and work plan. And you will receive technical assistance and will be paired up with a technical provider during this 3-month window between the pre-proposal due date and the full proposal due on December 6th. Next slide, please. So we will have technical assistance, as mentioned just now, through a variety of ways. We have office hours that started back in mid-February, and these are hosted by our third-party technical assistance team. They are hosted every other Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. However, you will have to register through Zoom, and we have those links in the chat. And these are meant to help applicants talk with technical assistance providers, workshop through any project ideas, and anybody can join at any time during this office hour window. We will also have additional TA through consultation service calls. These are more individualized and will provide a one-on-one with a TA provider so the applicant can address any needs and brainstorm ideas for their project proposal. However, right now we are prioritizing unsuccessful applicants from round one, specifically for communities in underserved, tribal, or unincorporated communities. We will also host application workshops in July once the notice of funding availability is released. And we will have more information on the dates and registration links later this spring, summer. Next slide, please. For the threshold criteria for the program, we simplified it to increase program accessibility and remove redundancy. So the round one threshold requirements were removed, such as including a project map that meets all of the specifications of the guidelines, and instead we're requiring that map in the scoring criteria. The project has to meet the eligible project area eligibility that was just mentioned a few weeks ago. And for eligible applicants, all partners have to be eligible, but with the managing stakeholder providing all the required information. Next slide, please. We won't have enough time for the application components to go into detail. However, we have a short list here that you can find on page 17 of the guidelines. And we will also have templates available for some of these components when we release the notice of funding availability. Next slide, please. And for the scoring criteria, you can find the scoring criteria on page 18 of the guidelines. However, some changes that we made was that we refined it for more clarity, and we now have a section dedicated for the interview component of the program, and that will be 10 additional points. So we wanted to note that the following scoring criteria will only be applied to the full proposal stage following the pre-proposal, and we will provide additional information on the application process with the NOFA. So however, the pre-proposal won't have scores with this, won't be designated scores according to this table. And now I will pass it to Ina for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Blanca. Do we have any questions?
Or if there's any, I know we went through that actually pretty quickly. So if there's any points or slides that would be helpful for us to go back to, we're very happy to do that.
Yes.
We have a question from Lily that says, how soon will we have access to the slides? These slides we can post by the end of the week along with a recording of this webinar. So we will try to do that by the end of the week. And we can send out a notice via email to all the participants.
We might not post the slides directly on the website, but we can email them out usually.
Sounds good. Any questions coming up for folks? Happy to hang out for a little bit longer while you all consider. And then do you want to just remind folks that we will be having additional workshops where we'll have an opportunity for folks to provide feedback on the guidelines. I think if anyone has initial feedback that they want to share, happy to kind of hear anything that's coming to mind for folks on this call as well. But yeah, we'll be having those initial workshops in early April. And then the public comment will be open until April 15th. Okay, well, I guess we were really clear. It's always great.
Yeah, and our colleague Marky just dropped in the chat the profiles of our round one grantees, if anyone's curious and seeing those, and who was awarded and kind of how they oriented their collaboratives. And then she also shared our resource page, and that's the page where there's a lot of round one information on there currently, but you will find our updated round two timeline, the round two guidelines, that summary of proposed changes, and then we'll eventually post our application and other round two resources there as well.
I'll also mention that for the consultation service calls for unsuccessful applicants in the last round, unsuccessful applicants should have received an email with an intake survey. But if you didn't, you can reach out to us and we can forward that to you. And that will be scheduled by the technical assistance team.
All right, well, maybe we'll give it another minute. If anyone has a question that comes to mind, and if not, we will close the webinar a little bit early. I think that, if any questions do come up, you can feel free to send us an email. We do actually have a new email address, which is kcace@sgc.ca.gov. We still can also receive emails that you send to our old email address as well. So no worries, but yeah, thanks. Sorry, I just dropped that in the chat. And so if you have any questions that come up, you can feel free to send them there. Also, if you prefer to provide written public comment, you can send it there as well. And then just another plug for our additional audience-specific workshops. We will have 2 general workshops, and then one that's specific for rural audiences and one that's specific to tribes. And so we're really looking forward to having a robust conversation during those to get some feedback on the guidelines and see where there may be opportunities for us to update or shift things to make them more responsive to folks' needs. And then we'll be finalizing our final guidelines at the end of June. So if there are no other questions, maybe we can close a little bit early, and please just feel very free to reach out to us at any time if any additional questions come up.